There's a lot of great teachers teaching about the last days. They have a lot of great things to say, and I have bookshelves filled with books on the last days, but there are things that are not being said, that are not being taught. I want to teach for just a few minutes out of a teaching that I did called The Role of Israel in Last Days Prophecy, and there's 3 points that I want to make. The first that is one that is understood quite clearly by many that are teaching about the last days, and that is the restoration of Israel and, in particular, Jerusalem in 1967. And I want you to take a look with me at Luke chapter 21, verse 24. And Jesus is teaching here about the destruction of the temple and the sign of the end times or last days. And a very specific statement in verse 24 says, "They will fall by the sword and will be taken as prisoners to all the nations." That's happened. And Jerusalem will be trampled on by the Gentiles or by the nations until the times of the Gentiles are fulfilled. Now this is fulfilled. This has taken place. Jerusalem as a city has been trodden down for almost 2,000 years with the destruction of the temple and the city by the Romans, and then you have conquest after conquest, the Islamic empires, the Crusades, and all of these different conquests of Jerusalem, Gentiles, by the Gentiles, and very specifically until a set time in history. And we're told that that set time is when the times of the Gentiles is fulfilled. So one very clear Bible prophecy that's directly connected to the last days and often taught about is the restoration of Israel and Jerusalem, which was fulfilled in 1948 and 1967 consecutively. And since that time, we have been in the last of the last days. Jesus said, "You will not see me again," speaking over Jerusalem, "until you say, 'Blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord.'" This required a restored Jerusalem. Now, the second point is one you hear less about, and that is the regathering of the Jewish people, not just the restoration of the state of Israel, but the regathering of Jewish people, communities, scattered to the uttermost parts of the earth. And here I want you to look at Isaiah 11:11. Isaiah chapter 11, verse 11. And I love this whole chapter. Look at it with me. Again, a last days prophecy yet to be fulfilled. He says, "In that day the Lord will reach out his hand a second time to reclaim the surviving remnant of his people." And I like one translation, I think the King James, that says, "the outcast of Israel from Assyria, from Egypt, from Upper Egypt, Cush, Elam, Babylonia," and goes on through the islands of the Mediterranean. Cush, interestingly, speaking of Ethiopia, I believe what is today modern Ethiopia. Now, what's amazing about this, and I want you to see, and you don't hear much teaching about this, is that for the outcasts of Israel to be regathered, for the remnant of those that were scattered to the nations, the children of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, to be regathered, they have to be identified. And that's why we're seeing the revelation of groups like the B'nai Menashe in India, the Beta Israel and the Beta Avraham in Ethiopia, the Lemba community in the bush of Zimbabwe. This is a direct fulfillment of Bible prophecy, and now we're learning about other groups. We're learning about the Eber tribe in Somaliland. I've heard of a nomadic group in Saudi Arabia, Jews living in the desert like nomads, Jewish communities in remote areas of Afghanistan. The list goes on, Nigeria, Uganda, and so on. What's happening? What's happening is that the lost tribes of Israel, the outcast of Israel, the scattered remnant of Israel, is being identified, these communities in the uttermost parts of the world, and they are being restored. They're being restored to God. They're being, through the Messiah, they're being restored to the land of Israel. The third thing that I want to touch on, and I go into this in greater detail in my teaching, The Role of Israel in Last Days Prophecy, is the blindness coming off of the eyes of the Jewish people. The single greatest event that has to take place before Yeshua, before Jesus returns. Romans 11:25 tells us that a blindness in part has happened to Israel until the fullness of the Gentiles comes in. It's not full number, I believe it's fullness. And I want you to draw your attention to what the verse, how the verse begins. Brethren, speaking to believers. I do not want you to be ignorant of this mystery. So he's saying to followers of the Messiah, of course, the church in Rome at that time, but now you and I, particularly Gentile believers. Most of you watching are not from a Jewish background, but you've been grafted into the natural olive tree, which is Israel, and now you've become a partaker of all the blessings of Israel. The very specific statement is not to be ignorant. We're to be aware of what's ahead. We're to understand what the Bible says prophetically about the last days. That's why I devote a lot of time on this program to teaching that. I don't want you to be ignorant that there's a blindness that's happened to Israel until, in part, not a partial blindness, but there's two groups of Jews, those that are Jewish believers and those that don't yet know the Messiah. So there's a blindness in part, but it's again until. Just as Jerusalem is trodden down by the Gentiles until a set time in history, this blindness is for a set time until the fullness of the Gentiles comes in. And then we're told that there'll be a day when all Israel shall be saved. Now, I'm asked very often, is this all or is this a remnant? Who is this? I just know that it's the national salvation of Israel, the great majority of those who are alive at the time that this takes place. And what follows is the Redeemer then will come forth out of Zion. When? When the blindness comes off of the eyes of the Jewish people. When? When all Israel is saved. And then the Redeemer, and there's only one Redeemer, and he's not coming back to New York, he's not coming back to Rome, he's not coming back to any other world capital, he's coming back to Jerusalem, physically, under the control of the Jewish people. And then, only then, when the blindness comes off of their eyes, when they say, "Blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord," when Israel as a nation is saved, will the Redeemer, Yeshua, Jesus, the Messiah, then comes back physically, will return physically, bodily to Jerusalem, actually to the Mount of Olives, the same place that he left from. And these are things that are not being taught by many that I'm reading on the last days. And I go into this in much greater detail in this teaching, the role of Israel in last days prophecy. And it's important, again, that you understand. Romans 11:25, brethren, and I say to you, my brethren, my Gentile brethren, don't be ignorant of this mystery. It's not a mystery to those who have eyes to see and ears to hear.